Agile Transformation. Welcome to the webinar, whichever time zone you are in. Hope you have a productive session with us today. This is a monthly series of webinar. The topic today, as I mentioned, is Accelerating Agile Transformation Patterns and Reusable Solutions. What we'll cover today is what we find with the clients who are adopting and in various stages of adoption of Agile is they end up running into challenges which are largely around organizational issues of people, skills, and organizational structure, metrics, and so on. And often we find most people who are trying to transform are not equipped with various tools and techniques that can help them really accelerate the transformation. And we'll cover, we have with us a very seasoned professional in this topic, Ravi Verma. So I'm going to introduce Ravi in a minute, but he will cover the topic of how to accelerate agile transformation using the techniques. So Ravi is a seasoned professional, being on the ground level, having been practicing agile in various organizations, small and large. So he brings a spectrum of experiences that apply to both small companies as well as large companies. And the important thing about him is he's been a practitioner. So he actually knows the pain that companies go through when they are when the people are in the role of developer or QA or Scrum Master and so on. So I'll turn it over to Ravi, and he's passionate about this topic of how to accelerate agile transformation using techniques that he'll cover. So over to you, Ravi.
Thanks, Hemant. Hello, everyone. So let's get started. As Hemant said, that I'm really passionate about this topic. So let's sink our teeth into it. Let's talk about the goals for today's presentation. So what we'll do today is we'll take a quick look at a framework that I've created for accelerating agile transformation. Along the way, I'll provide 3 practical techniques that you can use immediately as soon as you get off this call. And also we'll have some introspective challenges that, some questions for you to noodle on and maybe gain some insights once the call is over. So as Hemant mentioned, I have practical experience as an agile practitioner, and to be quite honest, I was a skeptic before I became a believer. So some of the common agile impediments that many of you agile advocates, practitioners probably find in your organizations. Those who are skeptical, they may think it's just another fad of the day. The boss read a new book. People sometimes are upset. What do you mean? You want me to attend another meeting every day, so they don't like the daily stand-up? The key question is, what exactly is wrong with what we are doing now? Why do we need to change? Some people have challenges dealing with the fluid release content because you can't really tell your sales force right on day 1 of the release what exactly is coming out 9 months down the line or X months down the line. And finally, people just, those who are skeptical, they just throw up their hands and they say, well, these guys just don't get it. Now, on the other side, the perspective from an advocate or a practitioner is, one of the impediments that I personally found is chickens behaving like pigs. So many of you are familiar with that cartoon and the terminology. And there might be people in your daily stand-ups who are hovering around the periphery who may not have skin in the game, but who cannot resist the temptation to speak up in the daily stand-up. Many times the challenge is you have silos and you have misaligned goals, marketing, sales, development, and test, and that creates a lot of friction in your Scrum. One of the foundations of Agile is that you need an accessible customer or a customer proxy to give you frequent feedback so you can make adjustments. And sometimes that just does not happen. Product manager or whoever is the proxy may be too busy with sales calls or customer-facing meetings. And then one challenge that I personally faced is death by fire drills. So maybe every week or 2 weeks, there is this must-have deal that's probably $1 gazillion or more, and you have to stop everything, maybe abort your sprint, and crank out this new feature or enhancement request, and that can be very disruptive. So finally, those who are advocates of Agile, they say, these guys just don't get it. Now, the good thing here is there is some agreement between both sides, but not that in this case it helps much. So here's the question I want to ask you. Are these impediments unique to each organization, or are there any common patterns that stretch across organizations And maybe those can lead us to some reusable solutions. So let's talk a little bit about patterns. Most of us in the R&D, software R&D field are familiar with design patterns. And basically, it's a reusable solution to a common problem. It's a template that you can use in many different situations. And most of us are familiar with some of these examples. You have singleton classes, you have a pub sub, facade, proxy, and so on. The key point here is that when we engineer a system, we don't really code from scratch. We're going to scour the internet and try and find out, well, what patterns can I identify and can I reuse something that somebody has already done there? Can I extend a class, for example? The question is, we already use this approach for engineering systems. Can we extend or adapt this approach to removing agile impediments? And that's the central question we'll be talking about today. So that's the basis of this framework that I've created for accelerating agile transformation using patterns. All I'm doing is extending an approach we use to write code. Now, this framework has got 3 pillars. The first pillar is patterns in change. Second pillar is patterns in personality. And the third pillar is patterns in conflict. And what we're going to do today is I'll introduce each of these pillars and give you one practical technique, like I said, that you can start using as soon as you get off this call. So let's start with patterns in change. This is a familiar quote, change is the only constant. You've probably heard it and used it many times. Now, what I found surprising was that it came from ancient Greece. I might wonder, what the heck did the ancient Greeks have to complain about? I wonder what kind of change they had to face. But the point is that through the ages, one thing that is constant is, mankind faces a lot of change. Now, what Harvard Business School professor John Kotter, who is an international change leadership guru, did, what he did was he started doing research on large-scale organizational change efforts. And he found some pretty surprising statistics that over 70% of all organizational change efforts do not meet their objectives. Only 10% actually exceed expectations. So here's the question, why? What is it that we can learn from the 10% that actually exceed expectations, and how can we avoid becoming part of the 70% change efforts that fail? So what Kotter did was he extracted some common patterns in 10% of the successful change efforts. And then he used these patterns to create a reusable 8-step process. And that's the process that we're going to learn about in brief today, and that's the first pillar of our framework. So what we don't have to do is we don't have to reinvent the wheel and create this process on our own. We just need to use it. So what Kotter did was he divided his process into 4 phases. First, you set the stage for the transformation. You decide what the transformation is all about. You make it happen, and then you make it stick so that you do not regress back to the old culture. And the first phase starts with a very important step, which is creating a sense of urgency. Why is it that we need to introduce Agile? What is not working with the legacy methodology? Once you do that, you have to pull together a guiding team. Now, this team needs to have the right kind of people on it. You need people with power. You need people with expertise. You need people with social connections who have credibility and respect out in the network, out in the organization. You need people who get the big picture, and you need people who can get the job done at the ground level. So assuming you have the team together, the team can then get together and develop the change vision and strategy. The vision needs to appeal to the hearts and minds of the people who are actually going to carry out the change. And you need to have a realistic and an achievable strategy. So let's assume we got all the 3 steps taken care of. Now we need to communicate, and spread the message so that people at the ground level, they understand and they buy into the change. And this is an important step. You need to use all kinds of different media, from one-on-one communications, town halls, all hands meetings, video, whatever. People are buried under a deluge of information. If you want your message to stick and to resonate and to finally sink in, you have to communicate a lot. The next step is, let's say the team finally understands, they bought into the plan. We need to remove obstacles in their path. So when you have motivated people, empowerment isn't really you injecting someone with some kind of power. It's more about removing the obstacles that sap the energy of people when they're trying to get things done. And what's going to happen if we take care of the first 5 steps is we're going to start generating some short-term wins, and maybe some of the skeptics are going to start getting attracted and joining the movement, because now they start seeing the results, they start seeing the value of your agile methodology. Now this would be a logical place for complacency to come back in, and that's the last thing we want to do here. We should not let up. We need to keep increasing the momentum and generate more wins until finally you've created a new culture of agile software engineering in your team. So that's a quick look at the 8-step process. Now what I found surprising when I was exposed to this process was it showed me some of the mistakes that I've made in some of the change efforts which did not go too well for me. What I used to do was I would start at step 6. My thinking was, well, let me produce some short-term wins, and then people are going to understand and they're going to join the team. But if you notice, this is where we need to start at step 1, and a lot of prep work needs to be done before you get to the point where we typically start a change effort. So that's an important message, and what we're going to do today, the practical technique that we talk about, is the first step, creating a sense of urgency. The most important step in your change process has got to be creating a sense of urgency. And I read a quote yesterday in a book that as leaders and managers, we spend 90% of the time selling a solution and 10% of the time selling the problem. And people are just not interested in buying a solution to a problem they do not see or understand. So we have to start by answering the questions. Why are we introducing Agile? Why now? What is not working well with our current methodology? And what's going to happen if we preserve the status quo? And let's talk in terms of our stakeholders, our investors, our customers, employees, our partners. What about the metrics on which the business is going to be evaluated? Revenue, profit, whatever metrics are relevant to you. And most importantly, do we have any stories or hard data to support what we are trying to say, what we're trying to persuade people about? So this is the most important step, and sometimes the one step that we are often guilty of short-circuiting. If we don't have compelling answers, it's time to stop the transformation. If we don't, we are setting our teams up for failure, because they are going out in the organization and maybe they are surrounded by skeptics, and they're constantly on the defensive because people are challenging them and they don't have well thought out answers. And finally, your transformation could be one of the 70% that fails, and you could die the death of 1,000 paper cuts. So what we need to do definitely is we need to be pragmatic. That's what the literature on Agile says. You've got to tweak Agile where possible, but you've got to avoid over tweaking it to a point where, satisfying every demand to make Agile look like your legacy process, it becomes self-defeating. If you succeed, you're going to fail, because what you're left behind is certainly not Agile in the first place. So the challenge is, how do you avoid the weeds? How do you raise the conversation to a higher level? And the answer is, you have got to start by creating a sense of urgency. You have to address these questions, and you have to equip your team with compelling answers and stories and facts such that they are not defenseless or not constantly on the defensive when they go out in the organization. So here's the introspective challenge I'm going to leave you with, the first of 3. How have you created a sense of urgency for your Agile transformation? What's working well and what is not working? And where can you improve? So let's move on to our second pillar of this framework, and we're going to talk about patterns in personality type. And I'm going to start with an example or an analogy. So let's suppose there is an organization which creates client-server, which has a product which has a client-server architecture, and they are planning for their next software upgrade. So they have their servers, let's say on Windows and Linux, and they have clients on these 4 platforms. As always, there's a lack of time and staff and money, so they have to make judicious use of available resources as they're planning their release. And let's say they're talking about testing. So there are 2 extremes for them to do their test planning. One approach or one extreme is maybe they just test one combination, maybe an XP client and a Windows server, and release the software and hope for the best. And most of you know this is not going to work. The other extreme is you test each and every combination, and chances are they'll never release and the company is going to fold. What we do as experts is that we are trained to be pragmatic. So we cover the bases. We probably use Pareto's law. 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes, and we use expert judgment to select some approach in between the 2 extremes. Maybe we put a lot of effort testing some of these combinations, which a lot of clients have, and then progressively less effort, perhaps no effort in this one configuration. So what's the point here? As with software upgrade, so with organizational upgrade. One size does not fit all. The mistake that I used to make many times, when I was a green manager, as I was rolling out changes, was I got the message, I knew it made sense, and I would roll out the change. And there was that one consistent message which I thought would appeal to each and every person on the team. It doesn't work that way. And you cannot address each and every combination, just like our software upgrade. People deal with changes in different ways, just like software or hardware platforms respond to software changes in different ways. Some are stimulated and excited, oh my God, great, there's a new agile methodology. And some are depressed. Maybe there's change fatigue, yet another change. And there are many who are in between, in the continuum between excited and depressed. We need to cover the bases. We need to understand, just like we look at the patterns in our target hardware configuration during an upgrade, we need to understand the patterns in the personality types on our team. You understand the pattern and you manage the change, because you cannot manage something that you do not understand. This is a very powerful quote I read in a book. People do not resist change. People change all the time. What people resist is having others impose change on them. So for you, this change is intentional. You saw a problem in the organization. You went out, you found an exciting solution. You think it's the right time, and you know that Agile is going to solve those pressing problems that you have seen. For someone who has not made the same journey as you have, this is an imposed change. And for them, it could be arbitrary. It could be abrupt. And they may not see where this is coming from. This is a mistake that I've made myself, where I was really excited about Agile. I shared this with my team, but I forgot that at the time when I was a skeptic, the first thought that came to my mind was, well, you don't need to teach me how to deliver software. I've been doing this all my life. So for those on whom the change is imposed, it's very arbitrary. If we ignore this gap, we're going to cripple our change. So this may not be comfortable. It may not be a pleasant gap to notice, but you have to acknowledge and address it. So let's talk about the Myers-Briggs, because this is the framework that you can use to address this gap of perceptions. The Myers-Briggs is an assessment, or MBTI, which was developed by Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Myers based on the theory of Carl Jung. And what it does is it provides a model for understanding the type differences in human beings. And let me give you an analogy. Type differences in human beings are similar to hand preferences or handedness. So most of us are capable of using both our hands. It's just that we probably prefer to use one hand over another in most situations. I mean, you pick up your car keys with one hand, you pick up your groceries in one hand, you write, you sign with one hand. Now, if the need arises, you can probably switch in some of these examples. It just may not feel as natural as using your preferred hand. So let's extend this example now. The Myers-Briggs indicates our preferences in 4 areas. And in each of these areas, there are 2 opposite extremes of the scale. So the first scale is where we direct our energy or attention. So you might have noticed this in your teams. There are those who have a preference for extroversion. They love to talk things out. You rarely have to ask them what's on their mind because they will tell you before you ask. These are the kinds of people who are the life of the party. Maybe in your meeting, these are the people who are constantly talking. And then on the other extreme, we have those who have a preference for introversion. Now, these are the people who may not initiate communication. They like to read, they like to reflect, and they gain energy in the inner world of thoughts and ideas. And some of the sharpest people on my team, they are also they have been the silent people on the team. So I can look at them in the meeting and I can see the gears turning, but I may not hear anything from them unless I actually ask them, what's on their mind. And then they are a gold mine of expertise. So that's the difference between extroversion and introversion. The next area deals with how we prefer to take in information. And a lot of our time every day is about absorbing information like what we are doing today. And there are those who have a preference for sensing, and they rely on the 5 senses to deal with what is here and now, what's going on practically. And then there are those who have a preference for intuition, who are going to take a step back and try and connect the dots. They will look back into the past, they will try and derive patterns, they will look at possibilities in the future. And we need both kinds in a healthy, in a balanced team. Now, once you take in information, chances are you're going to process it and you're going to make a decision. And again, people prefer to make decisions from different angles. There are those who have a preference for thinking, who are going to think about logic, and are going to analyze it in a very perhaps clinical way, and then reach a logical conclusion based on pros and cons. And there are those who prefer to start by thinking about the impact on people. How is a particular decision going to affect all the people involved? And in either case, no matter what your preference, that is just a starting point. So chances are, as we evolve with time, we may prefer to start with thinking, and then we complement that with feeling, or vice versa. So we make a good decision that takes care not only about logic, but also about the impact on people. And finally, when you've made your decision, now it's time to go and execute. You go out into the world, and then you accomplish your goals, you achieve your targets. And here we have those who prefer a judging attitude. And what that is they prefer to structure their outer world in a very methodical way. These are the people who like plans, who like milestones and schedules, and they get a sense of accomplishment from checking things off. And then there are those who are perceivers, and they prefer spontaneity. They like to be flexible and to adapt based on how things are progressing. And they may feel constrained by a very rigid schedule. So what's going to happen is, if you were to take the Myers-Briggs, it would assign you 1 letter from each of these 4 pairs. So you would get a 4-letter personality type. And the different combinations, they give us 16 Myers-Briggs personality types. So we feel most comfortable when life allows us to operate in our preferred zone. But as we grow and mature, and that's a lifelong process, we start gaining more competence in flexing our type, or being confident even outside of our preferred zone. So this is a crash course in Myers-Briggs type theory. Just want to establish the foundation for applying this to agile transformation. So what happens is, our personality type influences our needs during change. It influences how we want to be informed. So do I want to hear about the agile transformation verbally, one-on-one, in a group meeting, or would I prefer a PowerPoint presentation so I can noodle on it? What kind of information do I want? Do I want a lot of detail? Do I want case studies? Do I just want a high-level one-sheet white paper? most importantly, what criteria am I going to use to support or resist? So, whenever somebody makes a proposal to me or it comes down from management, internally, I'm processing it to see, well, does this make sense? And am I going to buy in, or is this yet another harebrained idea that came from management? Once I've made my decision, how do I want to be involved in the change? And finally, how would I like the change plan to be structured? So personality behind the scenes is dictating the answer to all of these questions. And what the Myers-Briggs framework does is it gives you an ability to really understand what's going on in the minds of your team. So there's a three-step process that the Myers-Briggs framework can be used to apply. You first need to understand what your own needs are in the course of a transformation, because if you understand your needs, you can make a request that your own needs be met so you can be a positive and a constructive player in the transformation. Now, once your needs are taken care of, you need to look around and pay attention to the needs of other people. See what challenges they are facing and support them so that they are also constructive players in the transformation. And then hopefully together as a group, you can succeed. And what we're going to talk about today, the practical technique that I'm going to leave you with, is that you need to attend to the needs of others during a time of change. So let's apply the Myers-Briggs lens on attending to the needs of others. So let's say you have someone who's extroverted on your team. Extroverts need the ability to discuss and develop ideas, and you can't just hand it down to them and say, just go do it. So one possible application of this is maybe you need to have town halls or group meetings where the extroverts on your team get a chance to brainstorm with you, refine the ideas, and get engaged and be part of the solution. Now, introverts, on the other hand, they need to read and reflect and decide, and they may not be very comfortable speaking up in a large gathering. So you need to give them some material up front, maybe presentations, case studies, white papers, allow them to think about it, and then they'll form their ideas, and reach out to them either one-on-one or small group sessions, more intimate sessions, and draw them out and ask them, what's going on in your mind? What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? Those who are sensors, they want real hard data and specifics. Tell me exactly why we are doing this and tell me how you're going to roll this out. So maybe if you want to answer the question of why with specifics, maybe there's a deal that you lost because of your legacy methodology. Maybe you can quantify that. Hey, remember we lost X million dollars for customer Y. And Agile is a way where we can avoid those kind of things repeating in the future. And there are those who are intuitors. Now they want to see the big picture. So tell me how this is going to make sense based on where the organization is headed. So we need to be able to flex our type and speak to them in a way that appeals to them and tie to the organizational vision and mission and goals. So if your organization is in the business of delivering the best software for banking in the shortest possible time, explain how Agile can help meet that vision, that core purpose, better than your current methodology. And then people are going to process the information and then they will decide, am I going to resist or am I going to support? And those who have preference for thinking, they are going to ask for logic and they are going to ask you why, tell me why. One example that you can give them maybe is dead code. So let's say you have a 9-month process or a 9-month release cycle and your alpha kicks in at the 6th or 7th month. And you spend a lot of time and effort developing a feature and then the customer says, this is not what I want, I'm never going to use it. There's a bunch of dead code sitting there that the effort could have been better applied to something that the customer is going to use. Agile gives an opportunity to get frequent customer feedback so you can make mid-course correction. That's one way of explaining to those who have a preference for thinking. Now those who are going to decide to resist or support with a preference for feeling, they're going to talk about how is Agile going to make life better for my colleagues, for the peers, for the employees, or customers for that matter. Now, you could talk about, well, maybe Agile can lower stress, or it can have better relationships because it provides a vehicle for addressing some of the familiar conflicts that shatter teams, that shatter morale. And finally, when your team starts to execute, those who have a preference for judging, they need clear goals and schedules and timelines. And maybe you can highlight that there is a rhythm, there is a cadence to Agile. You have 4-week sprints or whatever sprint interval you use, and engage them in the planning process so they are part of defining the goals and schedules and timelines. And then those who have a preference for perceiving, and they want spontaneity and flexibility, and talk to them about how Agile allows you, let's say, to adjust the backlog based on what new information emerges. And the flexibility that the Agile methodology provides, for instance, as opposed to a waterfall methodology. So again, a very quick introduction. You do not need to know the Myers-Briggs type of the person you are speaking to. Just realize that a single message is unlikely to work, just like a single piece of software code is unlikely to work on all combinations of target platforms. So it's like a JVM. You know, you have a JVM for XP, you have a JVM for Linux. You can write the best code in the world, but if you're not running it on the right JVM for the target platform, the code is going to bomb. It doesn't mean the platform is bad, doesn't mean the code is bad. It just means you got the wrong JVM. So think of people in a similar way. Flex the message, adjust the message until it appeals to the concerns, to the heart and the mind of the person who is listening to the message. So here's the second challenge that I'm going to leave you with. How have you tailored your Agile transformation for the different personality types on your team? What's working, what's not working, what can you make better? And now let's go to the third and final pillar of our framework, patterns in conflict. So no matter what approach you use, chances are when you have a bunch of talented and passionate people, you are going to get conflict. Now, before I did my training and certification in conflict resolution, I used to have a very negative connotation or association with the word conflict. The image that came to my mind was often of war or fighting and arguments. But I learned an interesting alternate definition for conflict, and that is any situation in which your concern, your expectations, your desires differ from those of another person. So conflict itself is neutral. Managing conflicts generates good or bad outcomes. And I love this definition, I love the distinction because the power is in my hands. Once I get a conflict or get into a conflict, I can steer it any which way I want towards a positive outcome or a negative outcome. Now, if a conflict is mismanaged, we are familiar with the consequences. You have damaged relationships, you don't make the right decisions, you have deadlocks and escalations. People can get disengaged, and in an extreme case, your project can fail. Now, if you manage conflict well, if you steer it in the right direction, you have people who understand each other. You have innovative teams. And this is an important part for Agile practitioners. You have self-managing teams. One of the goals of Agile is to move away from the command and control style of management and create autonomous self-managing teams. And if you teach your teams to manage conflict, they reach this goal. So you have engaged teams, you have successful teams, and the challenge for a leader is how do you model positive conflict resolution behavior? And how do you pass it on, and how do you teach it to your team so that they emulate your behavior? So again, conflict itself is not an evil, it's necessary. And what you need is what Patrick Lencioni says, constructive ideological conflict. That's the challenge. So a couple of researchers, Ken Thomas and Ralph Kilman, they developed an assessment called the Thomas-Kilman Conflict Mode Instrument. And basically they proposed a way to manage conflict in a pragmatic and non-emotional situation-based way. So one of the reasons that many of us avoid conflict is that our experience tells us it's messy. It's going to be extremely emotional. There's going to be a lot of collateral damage. But if somebody taught us a simple way to deal with conflicts in a non-emotional and pragmatic way, we may not resist it that much. So that the TKI gives us two independent dimensions of managing conflict. So the first is assertiveness. How hard am I going to try to satisfy my concern? And the second is cooperativeness. How will I satisfy the other person's concern? So based on these two axes, you get 5 styles of conflict resolution. So let me illustrate this using an example. So let's say what the conflict is about is who gets to eat this pie. So I want to eat this pie and there's another person who wants to do the same. And I'm going to illustrate the different conflict styles that I should use based on my underlying intention. And I'm going to shade this pie green based on the underlying intention I have about what portion of this pie I want to eat. And I'll shade it blue to illustrate the part of the pie that I want the other person to eat. So let's start with the first style. And let's apply it to Agile. So let's assume I'm a Scrum Master and I'm trying to adopt or roll out Scrum in an organization, and there's this one team member who's resisting attending the daily Scrum meeting. He's basically flat out saying he's not going to attend even a single Scrum meeting. It's too inconvenient. So let's apply this TKI model to address this particular issue. So the first style is competing. If you notice, it's high on assertiveness and it is low on cooperativeness. So my underlying intention is I want to eat this pie and I don't really want the other person to have even a single bite. So in this case, as a Scrum Master, I would probably say to this person, you better attend each and every meeting or I'm going to escalate to your boss. So it's my way or the highway. So it's a win-lose approach. Another alternate way could be I could collaborate with this person. So it's high on assertiveness, which means that I care about my concern, but it's also high on cooperativeness, which means I want the other person's concerns to be addressed as well. So together we bake a bigger pie and we have greater satisfaction. So what we could do is, if I were to ask this person, well, what is your concern? And the person says, you know what, I need to drop my child to school at 8 o'clock every morning. And then can we do it at 9 instead? And then I check with the other Scrum team members. It works for everyone. And we push the meeting to 9 o'clock. So we have increased the satisfaction. We've collaborated. This is not always the right way. Sometimes it can be very time consuming. So there are many factors that will help you select the right style. But it is something that you can consider. It's a win-win because both parties got what they wanted. And the next style is somewhat intermediate. If you notice, it's intermediate in assertiveness and cooperativeness, and you're compromising. Not an ideal solution. Maybe both parties get a little bit of satisfaction, but something is left on the table. It's a win-lose solution. So maybe I say, well, can you get your spouse to drop your child and maybe 2 or 3 times a day, and you attend the Scrum meeting on those days? So maybe you agree. Now it's not as good as attending on all 5 days. And it's inconvenient for both sides, but it's better than nothing. And then we have the fourth style, which is avoiding. So this is low on assertiveness and cooperativeness. Maybe I noticed that passions are running high and tempers are running high, and so I just back off and say, you know what, let's talk about this some other time. And let me think about it and gather my thoughts, and why don't we talk tomorrow? So in that particular instant, we both avoided the conflict. And at that instant, maybe it's a lose-lose, but tomorrow after I've slept on it, I'll come back and I have the ability to choose one of these styles and come up with a better option. And the last one is accommodating, where I'm very low on assertiveness. It's not about what I want. I want the other person to get what they want. Maybe this person is going through a challenging life situation, somebody is not well at home. So I realize that at this time, the right thing to do is to allow this person some time and not add to the stress. So I say, you know what, it's fine, we'll make do. Once things are better at home, maybe then we'll see if we can work out a better option. So I accommodate this person and maybe improve the relationship. So that's a quick look at the different styles. And if you notice, when you accommodate, you claim a smaller piece. When you compete, you're fighting for a bigger piece. when you avoid, you're decreasing satisfaction, and when you collaborate, you're increasing satisfaction. Now, the key message here is that there is no single best way. Each way has pros and cons, and there are costs and benefits. Now, if to be an effective manager of conflicts, you need to know when to apply or select each skill, and you need to know how to apply that skill such that you maximize your benefits and you minimize your collateral damage. And one of the challenges we face is becoming self-aware. Over time, we start developing our favorites. We use one style more than the others. You probably know who in your team competes or accommodates all the time. And they can look at you, and they can see what style you prefer. But the blind spots we have is we lack self-awareness about what styles we tend to overuse or underuse. So that's what we need to do, and that's the technique I'm going to leave you with is introspect, ask people that you trust, and find out what is it that you're overusing or underusing, and guard against that tendency. So if we were to take the TKI, for instance, it can shine a flashlight on our conflict resolution style, and what the report would look like is something like this. So for this person has a tendency to collaborate 99% more than the normal sample. He's on the 99th percentile. And this person has a tendency to underuse, avoiding, and compromising. This person may spend a lot of time even on collaborating on trivial issues and maybe stretched too thin, and may not know how to back off from maybe very charged situations. So the practical technique I'm going to leave you with is to observe your behavior, notice your tendencies, understand the costs and benefits of the different styles, and realize that at any given time you have all 5 styles to choose from, and guard against overuse or underuse when it's hurting you. So here's the challenge, bringing it back to the context of our webinar today. How is conflict resolution impacting your transformation? What styles are you overusing, and what is the impact? So let's tie it all together. So what we did today was we introduced a framework for accelerating agile transformation using patterns. And there were 3 pillars in this framework. The first pillar is patterns and change. Now this change leadership plan, the 8-step process, this can be the container for your agile transformation. You plan your entire change effort, you use diagnostics, and you monitor progress so that you can pinpoint what is not working and take corrective action. And the first step you have to do is you have to create a sense of urgency, and you can start the moment you hang up from the webinar. Now, the second pillar was patterns and personality type. As you're implementing and executing your change plan, you have to design the effort and implement it in a way that speaks to the hearts and minds of different personality types. So start addressing the needs of your team during change. Be receptive to what they need. And the last pillar is patterns in conflict. Use a conflict resolution technique or a framework to facilitate self-managing teams so that they don't get bogged down in deadlocks. They do not escalate to leadership every now and then. And the one thing you can do today is to start becoming self-aware. What style do you overuse, and how does that hurt your agile transformation? Now, it's not an all or nothing framework that you have to start from the first step. Pick and choose what makes sense for you. It does not have to be sequential. There are many options for you to apply what you've learned today. Ideally, you would want to perhaps roll it out org-wide, or you can begin with key players, or you have some hotspots in your organization. You can apply the right technique in your hotspots. And you can start applying the concepts as soon as you get off this call, or you do your research and start learning more and applying these techniques, these templates and patterns. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I'll hand over to Hemant.
Well, thank you, Ravi. This is excellent perspective and insightful discussion of a framework that all of us can use to accelerate agile transformation. We often ignore these what I would consider softer aspects. So folks in the audience, we will take a number of questions. We already have that. So if you have any questions as you reflect upon what Ravi just covered these three pillars. Please type in your questions in the question answer panel that you have, all of you have, and I'll keep track of the questions. While you're doing that, we'll take next few minutes just to introduce our respective companies, so you have awareness of who we are and how we might be able to help you beyond this webinar. So let me first, while you're typing or sending in your questions, let me start with a quick overview of sinnership. Sinnership is a software development partner for small to mid-sized companies. We typically focus on venture portfolio type companies who are going through expansion stage and needing to expand their engineering team, and we work in a partnership model with us to help them do what they need to do. For each client, we end up putting together a dedicated high caliber team of software and QA professionals, and we are much more than what you would think a staff org kind of model. We are much more of a partner who extends a client's engineering team to do high quality software development work. And because of our cumulative experience in software development, and particularly our focus on practicing agile methods, we are able to reduce the risk of software development. And as you all know, there are many risks in being able to deliver software on time, on quality, on scope, and to really meet customer expectations and all that. And we are able to really help our clients navigate those risks effectively. And a big part of that answer lies in the practice of agile as an approach. The next thing we offer, and as part of a value proposition to our clients, is to reduce the cost. We have a dual shore team. We have a development and design team and testing team in India, and a small product owner team on the US side, and we are able to provide very good cost advantage, typically 50% cost reduction by compared to the typical US cost if you were to have only a USD. And the last point about sinnership is the fact that we are a partner in a true sense with the clients and allow them the flexibility to take and when they're ready to convert their the team which is working with us into a captive operation, if they so desire, we allow them to do that, and not only allow but facilitate. So in a nutshell, we allow our clients to leverage the offshore economics without taking the upfront complexity and the risk, and retain the long-term advantage of converting it to the captive operation. So that's sinnership in a nutshell. The next page, that's just refreshing on your screen in a minute, in a few seconds, just essentially gives a glimpse of our clients. It is not an exhaustive list by any means, but it gives you a smattering of our clients. So you can see most of our clients tend to be small to mid-sized companies, typically building innovative software and needing a very efficient way to build it in a high quality without compromising the quality. So that's about sinnership. I'm going to turn it over back to Ravi to talk a bit about his company, Smooth Apps, and then we'll start taking questions.
Thanks, Evan. It's about Smooth Apps, boutique IT management consulting firm, and we help organizations in three areas. The first is organizational development, and especially in the IT field, sometimes we tend to neglect this aspect, how to make talented people work well together. Second piece, many of us may have been burned with outsourcing, so helping to select the right partners and managing relationships such that they are mutually beneficial. That's something that we have companies with. And finally, program management, getting the best and the most out of precious resources in these challenging times. We need to select and optimize processes, and that's the area of program management that we can help you with. The mission, the central mission that guides us, is to help organizations develop and use IT innovatively, creating prosperity and excitement and energy not only among employees but partners, customers, and communities, to create a circle of prosperity. So that's the guiding vision. So that's about Smooth Apps, and I think we can probably start answering some questions.
Excellent. So we have a number of questions here, and we'll just pick a few in interest of time and respect people's commitment on the hour. So before I get to it, one of the questions that came up, and I should have answered that in the beginning, is the availability of this document. So we'll make this document available via our website, and in a day later today or tomorrow, you should expect to receive a follow-up email from us giving you a link to this document so you can download at your convenience and go through. And we are actually recording it also. If the quality of recording is good enough, then we'll make the recorded version also available. That might take a little longer because the way the recordings have to be processed. So with that question answered, let's move to some of the questions that have come up. One of the questions is pertaining to the assessment of MBTI, which is you did touch upon that you need to know who your audience, your group is. So do you recommend, Ravi, that as a step one, that teams go through MBTI assessment so they know the types, these 4 letters, 16 combinations?
I would definitely recommend that. It's a great team building exercise for people to become type aware. And the reason I say that is the mistake that I often used to make. I'm an INFP, and the mistake I often used to make if I proposed an idea and other people do not immediately get on board was I sometimes got impatient, or I attributed a negative emotion to that reaction. What I did not realize at that time, because I was not type aware, is that people are hardwired differently. And just because someone may not agree with my idea doesn't mean that, people may not be obstructionist. So the benefit of a team being type aware is they understand how to communicate, they understand the differences between each other. But on the other side, there are things that you can do before you become a type aware team. Starting from the moment you get off this call, realize that we are all hardwired differently, and start looking at yourself and your colleagues through the lens of Myers-Briggs or personality type. And that may help you improve teamwork, and it may help you flex your type or your communication, run a different JVM as you are communicating to a different platform or a different person.
Let's take a follow-up question on this one itself. In your experience, in the typical development organizations, the engineering organizations, which includes, I guess, product management, development, and QA, and everything else around it, do you find patterns of, you said there are 16 types, are there certain patterns which are more dominant, so you have to be more sensitive to those you find across the board, or they are equally distributed, and you can find any of those 16 patterns? So if someone did not go through MBTI, could they second guess the types that they have to work with in a typical engineering organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are some patterns. For example, the IT people, I mean, those who are in technology, maybe developers, testers, sometimes we tend to be TJ types, very analytical people. And maybe those in product marketing or sales, they are extroverted, they get the big picture. Maybe they are EN types, whereas IT guys might be introverted. So there is a kind of clash, a natural clash or a tension that happens right there. Something interesting I learned during my MBTI certification is there is a glass ceiling when it comes to leadership. So in America, there's a disproportionate representation of TJ types in leadership positions. So that sometimes can create a bias in terms of thinking, decision making in organizations that can make certain other types, like those have a preference for feeling, it can make them feel excluded, and it can create some kind of imbalance in decision making.
Great, thank you, Ravi. Let's take another question on one of the other pillars that you covered, which is TKI assessment. So similar question, which is, does the team need to get overview of TKI, just like you gave in this webinar? Does the broader team need to understand the various styles of collaborative and all that? And let me ask this question, then I'll come back with another follow-up question, which is here.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. It's a very short and easy questionnaire. The biggest benefit that I personally had, and other people who had administered the TKI and interpreted to have had in IT especially, the aha moment comes from looking at your report for the first time and saying, there is no way this applies to me. And then I interpret the report, I give them some time to think over it. And then you look back and certain patterns start making sense in your life, in your personal life, in your work life. And it has created amazing results and, transformed relationships. So I would highly recommend people do that. Even if you don't do that, there must be 2 or 3 people you trust and respect in your circle. Ask them what patterns they have noticed in you, and just noodle on that and see if you can apply that information to improve conflict resolution.
Okay. So let's take a follow-up on this one. When you showed the chart of assertiveness and what was the other dimension? Cooperativeness. And the top right corner was your collaborative, which is where the pie expanded, and both parties shared that pie. So why would it not make sense to always use this as collaborative style?
Yeah, so collaboration has a lot of demands on time and energy. So as you might have experienced yourself, to get people in a room together, hash out all the differences and the concerns, it takes a lot of time and energy. Now, in some cases, it may not be right. So let's say you have an escalation. There is a system down. There is a SEV1 escalation from one of your biggest customers, and he's on the phone with the CEO, and the CEO says, fix this. And you have SLAs. Fix that issue or give a workaround in 60 minutes, or maybe workaround in 60 minutes and a patch in 24 hours. Now, you have a bunch of engineers or product management or team in the room, and they can't agree on anything. That's not the appropriate time to be collaborative. You need to be assertive, assert your leadership, compete, get a solution out the door, and then you buy some time, get breathing room, and when you're thinking about the maintenance release, now that's the time when you can be collaborative.
That's interesting. So your point is there is a place for each style.
Absolutely, there's a time and place.
So there's a question here, and that we'll just follow up on the same trend. This question asked, which is, any tips you can suggest on using collaborative style in the real world of when you have to deal with the QA and product management and dev and all the stakeholders in a typical agile team which is running, with high velocity? Any tips to use collaborative style?
The best thing that I would share is something I learned in the TKI books and white papers. Many times the mistake that we make is we start discussions with positions. I need this feature in this release, or I need you to make this change to the UI. And when you do that, you're automatically setting up the conversation for competing. It has to be a win-lose, because then two people dig in, and it's no longer about the customer. And what the TKI authors, they suggest is, how about you start from a concern and not a position? So here's my concern. I am concerned about the customer's inability to use this in a convenient way, or with the fewest mouse clicks possible. Chances are, if you have the right kind of people on the team, everybody wants to do the right thing by the customer. And then you can have a constructive discussion about concern, and that sets the ground for a collaborative discussion, not a confrontational and an adversarial, competitive discussion. So that's my biggest suggestion that I would share with people.
Excellent. Let's take one last question. We are quickly running into the time wall, which is the first pillar you covered was the change urgency topic. Now, most of us in our various roles have always gravitated to what you highlighted, which is create small wins first, and that's and we have always felt like that's a good way to build momentum. So can you talk a little bit more about why really that's not a good answer to create small wins first and then use that as examples to create a sense of urgency? Why not still follow that route?
If that works for you, if you have a critical mass of people who can generate those short-term wins, I think go do it. One of the challenges during change is, I was reading a book by William Briggs on transitions, is usually change involves some kind of loss. People are losing or have a fear of losing power, a familiar process, something that they genuinely believed in. Unless that sense of loss or the concern about losing something can be addressed, it's possible that the very people you need to create those short-term wins will be sitting on the sidelines or resisting the process of creating the short-term win. So if it works for you, go ahead, but chances are you will reach a point where your momentum is stalling, and that's when perhaps it's time to use other techniques.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ravi. There are a few more questions, but I think in the interest of time, let's wrap it up here. Thank you for taking the time and sharing these very valuable pillars. And I would remind audience that do feel free to contact us if you want to further discuss, and if we can help you with a diagnostic assessment. Ravi has a very clear thought process, as you saw today, and he can really help you in giving a little bit of a diagnostic on where you stand on these things and what you could perhaps do, quick wins to actually improve your transformation and accelerate it. And audience, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll see you next month for a similar webinar on a different agile topic. And thank you, Ravi.